The President, please be seated.
The court is now back in session. I now hand over to the prosecutor and the lead co-lawyer for the civil party. This is the last session for the two parties to put the question to the witness before us. You may proceed.
Mr. Kimborn, your last statement to us was in relation to your wife. She worked close to the centre. Well, she was not involved with any agents. She worked close to the centre, and I encouraged her to be strong, as we were known by a lot of people, and she could never be killed. Can you help us, please, as to when you were having these sorts of conversations with your wife?
I would like to correct it a bit. My wife was not working in the center, but following the war period, she did not work directly in the center. But what I described earlier was that certain individuals whom the ministry removed in order that they be sent to do the farm work. Then I became terrified, and I had to discuss it on a constantly basis with my wife about that issue. So we normally discuss at night because during the daytimes we all had to work.
Can you help me, please? What part of the country was your wife originally from?
Her hometown was not clear, and her date of birth was unclear as well. She was the daughter from a civil servant family, and she changed her places several times, and her father used to work with the Ministry of Public Works. So she changed the workplace from one place to another, from Kampong Thom to Kratie province. But as for my father-in-law's hometown was in Phnom Chrum, Santuk district, Kampong Thom province. And as for my mother-in-law, she was born in Prek Praong village, Prek Bak commune, Steng Trong district, Kampong Cham province. But before the coup d'etat, she was attached to work in Kratie province, and that's why my wife was also educated in Kratie province, in the downtown area of Kratie province.
Mr. Kimborn, you said in your OCIJ statements that other people disappeared around the same time as your wife, and you named Pong, Kot and Choi. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Brother Choi was transferred out, but I did not know where he was sent to.
In respect of Kot, immediately prior to Kot's disappearance, what position did he hold?
He was in the management team. He was the the director of the Department of Propaganda. and before that, he worked in the newspaper section, but later on he was designated by the minister to involve in the management team in the Ministry of Propaganda, headed by Brother Choi, and Kok was the deputy leader in that department. But the technical aspect of the work in that department was to read a radio news article.
You also added in your statement about leaders from the propaganda office disappearing, also Hu Nim and Tiv Ol. Is that correct?
Actually, I learned from my friends that our former boss, namely Hu Nim and Tiv Ol, during the 5-year time period in the war, they were the former Minister of Propaganda.
In your earlier interviews in respect of Khoi Tuan, you said you knew that he was arrested, quote, because I read a revolutionary flag magazine and all the pages in the magazine were Khoi Tuan's confession. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You may not be able to answer this, but can you help us in what year that revolutionary flag magazine was that you were reading?
I do not recall it very well, but I can remember most of the story about Khoi Tuan because most of the pages in the magazine was the confession by Khoi Tuan. But as for the specific time or date, I do not recall.
Thank you. In respect of the makeup of the Ministry of Propaganda and Education after Hu Nim had disappeared, is it right that Yun Yat then became responsible for both ministries?
Yes, that is correct.
You also stated in your previous interviews that there was a time when Nguyen Chea was in charge of the propaganda office. Is that correct?
Response. As a matter of fact, the leadership role was not his task. But when Yun Yat was not present, he was there to involve directly in administering the day-to-day work.
You said in respect of the period after your wife arrested that you were sent for political study sessions for half a month. And when you were asked what was the content of the political study session, you said this: to refashion ourselves and build the country, and talked about the issue of embedded enemies that required us to be alert. Is that correct?
Response. Yes, it is.
Dealing with what was happening in your life after this, is it correct that at one stage you were transferred to work as the chairman of the Kampuchea Krom radio program?
Response. Yes, it is correct.
When you were the chairman of that program, were you working in one of the ministries in Phnom Penh or elsewhere?
Response. I worked all along in the propaganda ministry. The difference is that I worked in different section of the ministry.
Mr. Kim Vun, when you were asked in your earlier interviews, E3/381, Khmer 00357-205, French 00402-997, and English 00365528. You were asked about what the broadcasts were about when you were the chairman at Kampuchea Krom. And amongst the items you said, talking in fact about another station or a program, you said this: there was also a program in the Vietnamese language run by Pang from North Vietnam that broadcasted confessions of Vietnamese prisoners of war. Is that correct?
Response. The interpreter could not hear the witness testimony because the mic was not activated enough for us to hear.
Mr. Kim Vun, can you remember the name or specify which program it was that was broadcasting confessions of Vietnamese prisoners of war?
Response. So far as I remember, it was the uncontested evidence concerning the Yuan enemies.
And which radio program or which broadcast was it that gave this information about the confessions, please?
Response. In the confessions, we captured the live interview or confession of the soldiers.
Now, just concentrating on your role as the chairman of Kampuchea Krom Radio, who was involved in the selection of material to be broadcasted?
Response. We received from two sources. First, from the border. Secondly, we had to write in accordance with the information emanating from the confessions of the Vietnamese prisoner of war. Because the Vietnamese prisoner of war and the Khmer Krom people shared the same territory, so part of their confessions were relevant. Because we did not understand Vietnamese, we had to seek assistance from the Vietnamese or Khmer Krom to assist us with the knowledge of the geographical feature of the area. At that time, we could only go all the way to Phnom Dun location in the Cao. And because we traveled to those locations, we could understand the geographical location. However, to obtain the actual information concerning that area, we had to contact the Khmer Krom people. And indeed, at that time, there was a chaotic situation in the South Vietnamese area or Vietnam area.
Thank you. Now, just concentrating solely on your radio program, so Kampuchea Krom radio, were speeches ever broadcast?
Response: No, they weren't in my program. We only broadcast the text written by us, and the voice is the voice of the Khmer Crown.
Mr. Kimvom, I want to go back to your wife, please, if I may. In your OCIJ statements, you said this: I'm not sure if she's still alive, but I haven't heard from her. Is that correct?
Response: Yes, it is.
Have you remained in that state of uncertainty since 1977?
Response: Yes, I have. I haven't received any information about her.
So that I'm clear, since 1977, has anybody in authority ever shown you any document to help you to know for sure what happened to her?
Response: No, I'm afraid not. I have never received any information other than information I obtained through the study session in which I was told that my wife belonged to a CIA agent network.
Mr. Kimvon, if such documents existed, would you like to be able to read them with your own eyes so that you could put your mind at rest?
Mr. President, if I may.
The President, Counsel, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand the thrust of the question, but I believe it's a gratuitous one. It's one that it doesn't merit one to be asked, let alone an answer. Thank you.
Mr. President, that doesn't sound like a legal objection. I apply, please, to show a document to Mr. Kimvon.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, could you please identify the document number you would like to put question to the witness? And on which subject matter would you feel that the document is relevant to?
Your Honour, the document number is E3/342, the revised S21 prisoner list. To answer your President, Mr. President, about relevance, Mr. Kim Vun has spoken about the disappearance of his wife. He does not know what happened to her. Even on the basis of his existing testimony, it gives reasonable cause to believe that she may in some respect be a victim in this case. And it's for those reasons and out of a sense of humanity that I asked to put this document.
The President, International Co-Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia, you may proceed first.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we left the realm of legal objections in this case when the prosecutor asked the witness whether he would like to see this document. And I would submit that if we are talking about a sense of humanity, I think it would be the humane thing to do to provide this witness with the opportunity, with the possibility to look at this document in private, not in this courtroom. If the document exists, the parties can take notice of it, but I don't think it is humane to expose the witness to such a document in the courtroom. If indeed the prosecution is concerned about the well-being of this witness, let this document be shown to him in the privacy of his own surroundings. That is our non-legal but humane submission.
The President, International Co-Counsel for Mr. Kyew Sampon, you may proceed.
Yes, Mr. President. I will be short and I will support entirely what my colleague has just said. I believe it is true if there are documents that are related to his family, the witness, of course, is allowed to be apprised of these. But this, again, is not a legal objection. I would like to underscore that the courtroom is not an appropriate place for the witness to become aware of documents that may give information about his wife. Maybe the harm has already been done, but I believe that it is the court's duty to ensure that all people are treated with dignity and with the right to respect their privacy.
The President, Counsel Kanawaz, you may now proceed.
Just very briefly, that was the purpose of my objection, Mr. President. A sense of humanity.
Mr. President, I echo everything that all three defence counsel.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, could you please hold down lead co-lawyer for the civil parties? You may proceed first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The civil party supports the defense on this issue. I believe that this document should be mentioned during the proceedings, but if the witness is to become aware of this document, he should become aware of this document in private.
Mr. President, my only concern is that Mr. Kim Vun sees the document if he wants to. I'm in your hands, Mr. President, as to how that's done.
The President, in respect of the request for filing of document or putting the document before the chamber, and it is challenged by several parties that are proceeding, it is appropriate, pursuant to the humanity and the privacy of the person concerned. This should have been done through the vessel unit. So the chamber therefore does not wish a document to be presented to the witness. If Mr. Co-Prosecutor wishes to put a few more questions, then you may proceed. But at the same time, could the Co-Prosecution advise the chamber as to how you already manage your time among the civil party co-lawyers, because we have only 40 minutes left for your time to put questions to the witness altogether with the civil parties.
Mr. President, thank you for that clarification. I have no further questions, and can I please pass over to the lead civil lawyers? Thank you.
The President, thank you very much. Lead co-lawyers for the civil party or civil party lawyers, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to remark that I will try to go through my questions before lunch break. I might need another 15 minutes after lunch break, if I may proceed after lunch break for 15 minutes with my questions.
The President, indeed you may proceed, and the chamber will assess your request whether it warrants additional 15 minutes as requested. The chamber will ensure that the proceedings will be conducted on a timely basis, and we will see to it when you are putting the questions. But the chamber wishes to make it clear that the chamber wants to ensure that the proceedings are properly conducted on a timely manner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, everyone in and around the courtroom. My name is Beini Ye. I'm an international civil party lawyer. Mr. Kim Won, first I would like to talk a bit about the time when you arrived in Phnom Penh. You said yesterday that you entered Phnom Penh around the 20th of April 1975. My question is, when you entered Phnom Penh, what was the situation in the city? What did you see and hear?
Response. In Phnom Penh, after the 17th of April 1975 liberation, there was very few people left in the city. The city was reduced to only a group or some people, including the soldiers. It was not as crowded as it used to be in the previous time. The President, Council for the Civil Party, could you please be advised to slow down in putting questions to the witness for good record and for your message to be fully rendered into the languages intended?
Yes, Mr. President, I will slow down. So, did you see any people leaving Phnom Penh? Any civilians?
Response. I did not see people being evacuated because they had already been evacuated before I moved in.
So when you said you saw soldiers, what were the soldiers doing?
Response. The soldiers were the front soldiers. They were assigned or based at their respective location.
When you said you arrived on the 20th of April, did you travel with the mobile station, radio station from Stung Trong?
Response. Factually, the Phnom Penh front mobile radio station left for Phnom Penh first, and I had to come later with a truck carrying printing materials, and we had to pass Chom Ka on Dong and Chom Ka Le before we reached Phnom Penh.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I will move on to the next topic. You said that between 1975 until the end of the Democratic Cambodia regime, you worked as a writer for the news and later on as the chairman of the Cambodia Krom radio show. I want to talk about the time when you were working as a writer for the news. When did you start working as a writer at the Ministry of Education and Propaganda?
Response. Indeed, I worked as a writer during the front regime. I was assigned to the printing house tasks, and I worked with Mr. Hunam and Dew All. In my capacity as a writer, I sometimes wrote some texts for them. So these two individuals gave trainings to me all along. But my core task was not writing. Only after we entered Phnom Penh, after the photographers group were set up, then Mrs. Yon Yat assigned me with the task of writing. That's the main task that I started on in 1975 as a writer.
Thank you. So did you start right after the liberation to become a writer at for the news, or long time after the liberation?
Response. I had been working all along since I was under the supervision of Minister Hu Nam. At the printing house, I could assist the printing matters and writing short stories and poems. And I could perform several other artistic tasks as well, apart from the printing house tasks. For example, I could assist in the stage performance and also singing, because we lacked forces and we had to mutually help one another. I helped them with the stage performance and arts, and they helped me with the printing house, so on and so forth. In 1971, I was not yet a real writer, because I had to practice writing on pieces of paper where we could make several copies when writing on that first page. And sometimes, as the Minister of Propaganda needed assistance, he would use me, and by that I learned on the job. And I also dealt with party-relevant documents. I was asked to help edit the text, for example, chopping out a part of the unwanted text so that it could be used for the front news. That's part of my job from then.
I just want to clarify first. I want to talk about the time after the liberation, after the 17th of April 1975. And as I understand, at that time, at some point, you were appointed to become a writer for the newspaper. And I just wanted to know, was it shortly after the liberation, on 17th of April, or was it a long time after the 17th of April 1975?
Actually, as what I said earlier, first I led a group of photographers. We learned how to take photos for newspaper. We had to master the skill to take photograph because those who were in charge of camcording includes the photos for the newspaper, photos for magazines, and photos for newspapers and for movies. And I started to learn about how to write articles, but I was not quite conversant with it because I only knew how to take a photograph. But later on, I learned to write newspaper articles, but it was not important articles. It was only announcements or so.
So you said you were only writing announcements. Did you ever write anything about the evacuation from Phnom Penh?
At that time, the topic on the Phnom Penh evacuation did not exist. The main topics over there that we covered was the national reconstruction efforts and national defense. We try to write in order to encourage people to build irrigation, try to grow crops and do agricultural works. So we did not cover the story of evacuation. We were not supposed to write about that because the information concerning the that movement, population movement, was restricted by others. We could not write freely. We had to follow the policy line of the party.
If you say you were restricted, who restricted you in what you should write about and what not?
I refer to the period when Hunam, Tiu Ol, and Yonjat, all of them were the leaders who gave the advice. And my direct supervisor also received advice from those senior people, and he handed down that order to us.
When you say that certain information should not be published in a newspaper, who were the recipients of this newspaper?
To my understanding, the information was circulated to all bases across the country. There were couriers, and then they prepared them in stack of newspapers. We printed in many copies, and they transported in trucks and circulated across the country.
Were they also distributed to civilians?
I ask other people. Normally, after printing the newspaper, we always had the follow-up records as to whether or not those newspapers were distributed to the bases and the people. But in terms of whether or not it reached civilians, I did not know for sure. As I said earlier, in certain places, people could cultivate rice and with good yield, but yet they did not have enough food to eat. And the same is true for the equipments we received after the war. There were many items in the warehouse, but they were not used to provide to the people. So coming back to the issue of newspaper, it could have reached the people, but I did not know for sure because I know that transport was not that easy at that time. So sometimes they could deliver them to the civilians. In certain areas, the newspaper, the content of the newspaper were widely disseminated. So at that time, there was the possibility to reach the civilians, or in certain places that it was not possible. And at that times, I encounter a different situation of life. For example, in Phnom Penh, people had something to eat, but in the countryside, they did not have anything to eat. So the same is true for newspapers. Certain areas receive the copies of the newspaper, but in other areas, no, they didn't.
You said that in the countryside, some areas did not have enough food. Did you report on this in your news? Were you allowed to report on this?
I said earlier, when I found anything irregular, I would report it to the minister. But the minister advised me, as I said earlier in my testimony, that the minister warned me that I had to mind my own business. So I did not actually disseminate such information to others.
Thank you. Can you tell us the difference between the newspaper that you worked on and the Revolutionary Flag or the Revolutionary Youth magazine?
Actually, the Revolutionary Flag was the internal party document. Even I myself did not read every copy of the magazine. Normally it was printed and disseminated to the party members, and it was meant actually for the cadres at the upper authority. I was one of the cadres, but I was not a member of the party. I had time to read the various issues of the magazines because I was attached to the broadcast department. And as for the news that we published, as a matter of fact, it was a simplified form of information. It was not something secret. But as for the revolutionary flag, the message in which were meant for the leaders. As for the newspapers and the pictures magazines for the public interest, we receive information from the publics and we disseminate or distribute to the publics, and that is also true for newspaper. As for the revolutionary flag, we did not receive information from the mass. Instead, we receive information from the leaders, particularly the directions from the leaders, and that was meant to train cadres in the lower rank.
You said yesterday that you had sometimes to read the revolutionary flag to write your articles for the newspaper. What kind of articles did you write based on the revolutionary flag?
Normally it was the instructive article involving the national construction affairs and the national defense. Then we can depict a portion of that article from the magazine. Now, for example, if we were to touch upon agricultural affairs or work, we had to expand on it. For example, the reconstruction of the country and the national defense by way of great leap forwards. We had to expand on that. And in addition, there was an objective to achieve 3 metric tons of rice yield per hectare. Then we had to expand to that, for example, in order to ensure that people had surplus of production for export. Then we had to expand on this topic. So we had to depict on that particular topic and expand on them for the interest of the public.
Is it fair to say that the newspaper was a method to convey orders that were published in the revolutionary flag to the mass?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, you said that as a reporter, you went often to the field or to the provinces to take photos and to cover the news. My question is, which areas did you go to at that time?
To my recollection, we went to all sectors and zones in cooperation with those sectors and zones in order to report on certain areas. For example, we went along with them and asked them for permission whether or not we could access certain place. And without their authorization, we had no access to it at all, because there were certain areas which was not secured for us. So normally they would warn us in advance if we were to cover any story from any particular areas.
And how often did you go to the provinces?
As a matter of fact, I went there rather often. I stayed there for some time, for 2 days, for 3 days, 5 days, or even a week, or even for 4 nights.
And could you choose where to go and when to go, or did someone tell you where to go and when to go?
If we targeted any area, we had to make a request directly to the minister, because the ministers would request to the upper authority to issue the laissez-passer or the travel permit for us.
When you say you targeted a certain area, how did you decide which areas you wanted to target?
Our target at the time, as I said, there were certain topics which were of interest to us. And if we went there to see it firsthand in the field, we could cover everything with every detail. And we learned about everything, and we took photographs of the place as well, so that our information on the newspaper was informative. So if we went there, we would have a lot of ideas to write it. And if we got the information but we did not have any idea, then the ministry would send us back there again. Now, for example, if farmers could not produce a good production, then we had to cover that story. Then, for example, if they encounter difficulties, if students studying in Phnom Penh who had difficulty growing crops or so, then we had to cover that story as well. We stay along with those people in order to establish relationship with them and get the information from them. They wanted us to work as closely as possible to the poor people, poor peasant on the ground. Otherwise, we would not understand their real life difficulties. So we were supposed to be there with them and learn firsthand of their hardship they had to endure at that time. And that was the basis for our news report, or sometimes we could also produce it into short story as well.
So if you lived with them closely, with the peasants and in the countryside, can you describe their living and working conditions at that time?
That is correct.
And can you describe how they lived and how they worked?
As a matter of fact, anywhere we wanted to go, we had to seek prior permission from our superior. We could not go there at our own will. For example, we had an idea to write about certain topic. We had our own objective, that was to cover the story about that topic, and we had to only mind our business with the confine of our responsibility.
I understand that you had orders to only cover certain topics. But when you went to the provinces, what did you see? How were the working and living conditions of the people? What did you see with your own eyes?
The places where I went, normally we were well received, and I did not witness any food shortage or starvation or hardship or so. Actually, the places where I went at the times, I did not really see any miserable life condition over there. And I only noticed that people were very active in their agricultural work or other work. For example, if they were tasked to dig canals or build dams across Chinet tributary. When the work site was opened, the Ministry of Propaganda and Education was also invited to attend the opening ceremony of the work site, and we took photographs of the sites, and we also filmed them in order to promote the movement. And we went to different other places. We also noticed those movements, the movement of making reservoirs and stocking waters also. So normally we went there together, the Ministry of Education and Propaganda, and sometimes only one representative from one ministry went there. But we normally went there in a truck, in one truck together. But in terms of the miserable life condition, we did not witness that. We did not witness people starving. So we only went to the places where people had sufficient food to eat, and if we look at the physical build of the people, they were physically fit.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned that people didn't have enough food in the countryside and that you were not allowed to report on this in the news. Now, you're saying that you only went to places where you never saw starvation and where people always had food. You also mentioned a few minutes ago that you lived with the peasant to see the hardship that they endured. Can you please clarify?
I would like to clarify two aspects. The first aspect on starvation. Actually, back then, sometimes the target we wanted to cover was the places where people suffer from starvation. Particularly, we went to Sector 25. I started my first work with Sector 25 in Sang Kothom. In that sector, there were new peoples coming from Phnom Penh, and I saw that there were a lot of people. It was crowded over there. And they ate red corn, and that was the place where I witnessed the starvation. But in other times, our leaders only brought us to the place where people had enough food to eat. So we had nothing to cover about the miserable life condition over there, because they would not bring us to any place that people were suffering from starvation. The same was true in Phnom Penh. When we cover stories in Phnom Penh, people had sufficient food to eat. There was nothing about food shortage over there. Actually, at that times, they ate in the communal hall at that time. Particularly in my unit in Ministry of Propaganda, we always had enough food to eat. And in terms of fish, when people in Phnom Penh left the city, then the fish that they caught from Trang Chomre were a lot. We had sufficient food and fish to eat. So I know that there were numerous documents about starvation, about hardship, mistreatment of people. But when I covered the news in that period, I never witnessed that myself. And the the situations that I consider it the hardship and starvation of the people was the first time when I was brought to one place, as I mentioned earlier, that people had nothing to eat but red corns.
Thank you. You mentioned that new people arrived in Sector 25. Can you explain the term new people?
News people are the people who were evacuated from Phnom Penh. There were a lot of them. In that sector, it received a lot of people from Phnom Penh because it was close to Phnom Penh. And among all of us, there were people who actually went to that sector as well. There were many people, that's what I noticed then.
And did you see how they accommodated so many people from Phnom Penh?
Generally, that was understandable. If it was crowded, the condition was like refugees as well. And at that time, there was no presence of the UN. So the situation was as it was at that time. And the 17th of April, it was after the Khmer New Year, and we are approaching the rainy season. So we had to live collectively, and we had to make use of certain public places, for example, pagodas and houses that were abandoned. Then we had to live collectively, and I did not know how the local authority in that particular place organized the people. And of course, they had to receive a lot of people. And following the war times, they had nothing much to eat. That could be understandable. And even in Phnom Penh, after the war, we were lack of even salt to eat. So we could imagine the food condition in the place at the time.
Thank you. Now, I would like to come back to the term new people. Did you ever write anything about new people in your articles?
As a matter of our publication policies, there was no distinction whatsoever between the old and new people. And in the article, we were restricted from making that distinction. And that was mentioned in the revolutionary flag, but in our ordinary publications, we were not allowed to make this distinction. And we also copy portion of it for a radio broadcast. So we only extract certain portion that does not affect the policy and party line. And we have constantly received advice from our superior that broadcasting was like carrying an artillery. It had enormous impact. So before any article was broadcast, it had to be reviewed time and again. We cannot decide to broadcast it at our own prerogative. We had to go through review, particularly the review of its content, and the editor-in-chief had to revise every content in order to ensure that it had less impacts.
Thank you. You said that the revolutionary flag mentioned the term new people. Can you tell me what it said about new people?
I do not recall this particular issue. I did not actually see it by my own eyes, but I only wanted to refer to the authority Of course, our newspaper did not have the authority to write about anything that is secretive. But in the revolutionary flag, they could write something that is secretive by the party. But for us, we normally run story of general sense, of general topics.
All right. You said that you are taking photographs in the countryside when you were covering the news. What kind of photos would you take at that time?
Response. The main photographs we took were for the purpose of the magazines, and we took still pictures for the newspaper, and also we took some video footages for the movies. We took photographs of the important events. We never talked about traffic accident like the news coverage of these days Cambodia. At that time, our leaders would ask us to write articles about building the country, articles that convince people to be educated on these purposes.
And did the same restrictions apply to taking the photos as they apply to writing articles?
Response. We had to be vigilant, and there was restriction in taking photographs because we had to cover the same confined topics. And as a photographer, we had been trained to the technicality of taking photographs and also the political aspects of taking the photographs. For example, for each photograph, what kind of elements could a photographer take into account before taking the shots? Whether the photo had contributed to the reconstruction of the country or not after it being taken.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I conclude my questions here. I would like to thank you very much for answering all my questions, and I wish you a safe journey back home.
The President, thank you, Counsel, and thank you, Mr. Witness. It is now appropriate moment for the lunch adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn for lunch until 1:30 p.m. When the next session resumes, we will continue hearing the testimony of the witness, and court officer is now instructed to assist the witness during the break. Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia, you may now proceed as you are on your feet.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our client would like to follow this afternoon's proceedings from his holding cell, as he is suffering from a headache, back pain, and a general lack of concentration, and we have prepared the waiver.
The President, the Chamber notes the request by Mr. Nguyen Chia through his counsel, in which he has requested that he be allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the entire remainder of the day, due to his health concern that he could not remain seated in the courtroom. The request by Mr. Nguyen Chia has been substantiated and therefore granted by the Chamber. Mr. Nuon Chea is now allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell through the video link for the entire remainder of the day. Mr. Nuon Chea has precisely to this effect expressed his waiver of his right to participate directly in the courtroom. The chamber asks that counsel submit the waiver signed or given thumbprint by Mr. Nuon Chea to the chamber immediately, and AV booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the AV equipment is connected to the holding cell so that Mr. Nuon Chea can observe the proceeding from there. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan to their respective holding cell and have Mr. Khieu Samphan return to the courtroom when the next session resumes. The court is adjourned.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ